They called it impossible. A Ukrainian MiG-29 gliding silently across dozens of kilometers inside Russia. Its pilot calm but focused. The night sky above Tatarstan quiet, except for the low hum of the jet's engine. Loaded with US-supplied GBU-39 small-diameter bombs. The aircraft had one mission: to cripple a Russian drone factory producing Shade-type drones that had been used to bombard Ukrainian cities. This was not a random target. It was the same industrial site linked to Moscow's drone program, a facility operating deep in Russian territory, and yet, in the early hours, the MiG-29 approached undetected, weaving through radar gaps, hugging low terrain, and preparing to strike. The mission was part of a larger Ukrainian strategy. Kyzyl had shifted from purely defensive operations to deep penetration strikes designed to dismantle Russia's drone production chain. Earlier operations had already targeted facilities in Dubna, Saransk, Chebeksary, and most notably the Yelabuga drone factory, 1,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Each attack sending a clear message that no target, no matter how deep inside Russia, was beyond reach. Intelligence suggested that the Tatarstan factory was a critical link in assembling imported Iranian Shade drone components, with local adaptations for Russian use, and satellite images showed a surge in production since early spring, making it a high-value target as the MiG-29 closed in. The pilot armed the precision-guided GBU-39 bombs, each capable of piercing hardened structures. Seconds later, the weapons were released, cutting through the air with a deadly hiss. Then, a split second of silence before a massive explosion ripped through the complex. Flames engulfed storage hangars, shockwaves shattered nearby windows, and thick black smoke billowed into the night sky, visible for kilometers. Workers scrambled, alarms blared, and the once hidden facility was now a raging inferno. Local Russian officials quickly confirmed an incident, but downplayed the damage, calling it a minor fire. Yet eyewitness videos showed collapsed walls, destroyed machinery, and emergency crews working frantically to contain the blaze. In Ukraine, military command watched the mission feed in tense silence. Analysts monitored real-time satellite passes, confirming that the strike had destroyed key assembly areas and severed power connections to automated lines. For the pilot, the relief was brief. Evasive maneuvers began immediately. Russian air defenses scrambled too late, with surface-to-air missiles streaking through the sky but failing to lock onto the retreating jet. Within minutes, the MiG-29 crossed back into friendly airspace. Mission complete. The aftermath was more than just twisted metal and charred buildings. For weeks, reports from Russian military channels hinted at production delays. Analysts at independent think tanks noted a measurable drop in the number of Shade drone launches over the next month. The ripple effect was clear. This was not just a symbolic blow. It disrupted the supply chain of Russia's most persistent aerial weapon. But the Russians were quick to adapt. Efforts to reroute production to alternative sites began almost immediately, with mobile assembly units and dispersed workshops emerging in multiple regions. The war had become a constant race between destruction and reconstruction. Back in Ukraine, the strike carried emotional weight. The pilot was greeted quietly by his unit, no public ceremony, only a shared understanding of the risk taken. Families of those involved expressed both pride and anxiety, knowing that each mission pushed the limits of survival. President Zelensky, in a later address, referenced Ukraine's right to defend itself at the source of aggression, stating that hitting drone factories was not escalation, but necessity. He reiterated that every Shade destroyed on the ground was one less terror weapon in the skies. Over Odessa, Kharkov, or Kyiv, the statement resonated across the country. As civilians remembered the nights of blackout, the sound of generators, and the fear brought by relentless drone attacks. Internationally, the strike sparked debate. Some Western analysts hailed it as a demonstration of Ukrainian ingenuity and the effective use of donated weaponry. Others worried about escalation risks. Yet the precision of the attack and the lack of civilian casualties muted most criticism. In Moscow, the Kremlin vowed retaliation, increasing long-range missile and drone strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure. August would see some of the heaviest bombardments of the year, with Russian drone attacks hitting record levels. A grim reminder that while one factory had fallen, the war machine was far from stopped. For the pilot, the mission would remain etched in memory, not for the destruction alone, but for the moments of silence before the bombs hit. For the knowledge that thousands of lives might be spared future attacks because of one night's work. The war was still a deadly chess match, each move met with a counter. But in those hours after the strike, Ukraine had scored a rare, decisive blow deep in enemy territory, and for a brief moment, the balance had shifted. Yet the cost lingered. Assessments showed Russia reallocating resources to vaccine production lines in industrial zones. Drone component manufacturing began to trickle back, albeit at a higher logistical cost and with more dispersed infrastructure. Ukrainian planners expected future strikes to grow more complex and calibrated. Intelligence and real-time surveillance became lifelines. The perfect execution depended on data, nerves, and timing. Meanwhile, families in Ukraine counted fewer drone notices, fewer sirens piercing the night. The crews repairing schools, hospitals, and homes sensed an almost tangible breathing space. Hope flickered when blackouts didn't come. But the deeper truth was that the war had not ended. It had just tilted. The response from Russia was swift, launching waves of Kh-101 cruise missiles and worsening air raids in retaliatory tempo. Ukrainian air defense systems strained, yet the morale boost from the drone factory hit gave them renewed resolve. Volunteer battalions, engineers, and Air Force teams rallied. Meetings ran into the early morning hours, plotting new coordinated strikes and reinforcing airspace through mobile SAM systems. Drones now flew higher, longer, and quieter as automatic defenses rushed to adapt. Political leaders convened emergency security sessions, confirming the logic deterrence through action. When evasive actions meet offensive purpose, Ukraine believed the momentum could hold, but knew every strike invited counter-strikes. Every exposed facility may fall next. Still, they pressed forward, planning follow-in raids, coordinating with allies, sharing intel and refining weapon paths. They aimed not to destroy for destruction's sake, but to protect the cities and civilians behind their lines. Still, as night fell once more over the eastern sky, somewhere above, another jet might be readying for its own silent passage. Its bombs waiting, its purpose clear. The war is deadly. Duel continued. One mission, one factory, just one night. But for that moment, Ukraine had reclaimed initiative, and that flicker of reprisal, of daring, set the tone for what was to come. The impact of that bold night mission rippled far beyond the ruined hangars. Russia's most prolific drone hub was momentarily silenced. Satellite analysts confirmed that production in the Yelabuga aerospace zone fell sharply, with sources noting that the general staff had reported a damaged final assembly line responsible for producing up to 300 drones a day. The strike ignited fires visible from Kazan to Nizhnekamsk, prompting temporary closures at both airports and piling pressure on regional logistics. Casualties were reported too, with 1 worker killed and 13 injured. Despite local official efforts to downplay the severity, Ukraine's campaign did not rely on that single strike. Repeat operations battered factories across the drone supply chain, from Cheboksar's antenna production lines vital for shielding, drones from jamming to Moscow Oblast's thermobaric warhead facilities, each explosion adding a new choke point. The cumulative effect began to manifest. Independent studies now warn that Ukraine's one-way attack drones have inflicted strategic damage on Russia's infrastructure and economy, costing up to €650 million in disrupted oil output alone. Meanwhile, Russia doubled down, launching unprecedented nightly drone bombardments, sometimes exceeding 700 drones in a single wave to retaliate and overwhelm Ukraine's defenses. These swarms tested Kyiv's anti-drone capabilities, pushing mobile air defense units to their limits while Ukraine countered with its own burgeoning drone production, scaling rapidly through domestic and Western aid, with projections estimating future output in the millions if funding continues. In parallel, the battle for the skies extended beyond factories to aircraft factories themselves, with authorities confirming a drone strike on the Lukavitsky aircraft plant near Moscow, a key center for MiG-29 and MiG-31, maintenance and shade drone not just Ukraine's defensive capability, but also Russia's modernization pipelines. Observers now describe the conflict as the most drone-intensive in modern history, with unmanned systems accounting for as much as 80% of combat engagement and battlefield damage, shifting warfare rhythms toward swarms of cheap, expendable drones over traditional mechanized assaults. This revolution in tactics resonates globally. Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb used hundreds of low-cost drones, some guided by AI to strike strategic air bases deep inside Russia, destroying bombers and surveillance aircraft, showcasing how small drones can cripple high-value assets with surgical precision. Ukraine's broader strategic calculus is clear. Each strike, each disrupted production line, each factory set ablaze, buys time, degrades enemy capacity, and shifts initiative in. As infrastructure is rebuilt, the rhythm of Ukrainian strikes forces Russia into constant adaptation, diverting resources to harden defenses, dispersal of factories, and the protection of swaths of airspace with scarce assets. On the ground, across Ukrainian towns, spared another midnight drone attack. People feel it quiet nights, fewer sirens, a glimmer of breathing room. Even as the war rages on, each factory ruined, each strike executed with skill, underscores a broader truth. This is not merely a war of firepower, but of ingenuity, defiance, and attrition, a high-stakes duel where resilience and innovation reshape front lines and factories alike. And in that shifting landscape, every successful mission, like the one on that starless night over Yelabuga, writes a new chapter in Ukraine's fight for autonomy and survival. The strike on the Yelabuga drone factory was still fresh in the minds of Ukraine's defense command, yet the war's tempo allowed no pause. The data coming in from reconnaissance satellites showed more than damage reports. It revealed a pattern. Russia had already begun rerouting its drone assembly operations into smaller, dispersed workshops hidden inside civilian industrial zones. Some disguised as agricultural machinery plants, others integrated into truck depots. These shifts were meant to complicate targeting and reduce the risk of a single catastrophic strike, wiping out entire production capability. Ukrainian intelligence, however, had adapted to this game before. The network of human informants inside Russian territory, combined with advanced electronic signals monitoring, allowed Kyiv to map out the new distribution, even as Russia tried to cloak its factories under layers of false corporate fronts and misleading registry filings. Asterisk. The MiG-29 mission had been a calculated risk, but its success emboldened the Air Force Command to explore even deeper penetration missions. Aircraft crews trained relentlessly for low-altitude, radar-evading runs, while ground-based planners simulated dozens of enemy defense responses. In these exercises, every second mattered: the timing of bomb release, the arc of approach, the fuel reserves for escape, all variables that meant the difference between returning home or vanishing from radar forever. Pilots, often in their 20s and 30s, bore the weight of entire strategic operations on a single night's sortie. Their training halls were lined with footage from prior missions, both successes and failures, serving as both warning and inspiration. Across the border, Russia's air defense network re-evaluated its gaps. Mobile S-400 and Pantsir S-1 units were moved closer to critical production zones. Early warning radars were recalibrated to detect low-flying jets attempting terrain masking. But even with these precautions, the sheer size of Russian territory made airtight protection impossible. Ukrainian planners knew this and exploited it, often combining manned jet strikes with waves of decoy drones to saturate detection grids, forcing missile batteries to reveal their positions and deplete ammunition. Asterisk. The psychological effect of these strikes on Russian factory workers was another factor. Reports surfaced of skilled technicians refusing to return to certain sites, some requesting transfers, others quitting altogether. The fear of sudden explosions became a constant shadow over these industrial zones. Local authorities tried to counter this with propaganda, framing the strikes as failures or minimal disruptions, but in private, managers admitted the downtime and staff turnover were hurting output as much as physical damage to the facilities. Asterisk. In Ukraine's cities, the public saw each confirmed hit as a small measure of justice. After months of enduring shade drone attacks that had targeted residential blocks, schools, and hospitals, the knowledge that the source of those machines was being struck deep inside Russia offered a kind of relief. Volunteers used these moments to rally support for continued military aid, and online communities tracked each strike, compiling open-source evidence, geolocating impact sites, and sharing before and after satellite images. This digital activism became part of the war effort itself, feeding morale and reinforcing the sense of agency among ordinary Ukrainians. The political ramifications abroad were complex. Western capitals closely monitored each deep strike, balancing their public support for Ukraine's right to self-defense with the diplomatic need to avoid direct confrontation with Moscow. Some governments placed quiet limits on how supplied weaponry could be used. Others loosened restrictions after seeing the tactical precision and lack of civilian casualties. Behind closed doors, defense ministers and intelligence chiefs debated whether a campaign of sustained deep strikes could shift the broader balance of the war or simply trigger harsher retaliation. Retaliation did come, in the form of Russia intensifying its long-range bombardments. Heavy missile barrages and drone swarms were launched at Ukrainian power stations, grain silos, and railway hubs. The damage was severe in some regions, leaving thousands without electricity and disrupting supply lines to the front. Yet the frequency of these barrages also revealed cracks in Russia's own logistics. The need to replenish missiles and drones faster than they could be produced meant that each lost factory hit them doubly hard, forcing a trade-off between immediate strikes and long-term sustainment. For the Ukrainian Air Force. The lesson was clear: a one-off victory was not enough. The campaign needed to be sustained, methodical, and unpredictable. Each strike designed not only to destroy hardware but to force Russia into costly defensive reallocations. The more resources Russia spent protecting dispersed drone factories, the fewer they could commit to the front lines in Donetsk, Zaporizhia, or Kherson. In war, attrition was not just about bodies and tanks. It was about time, focus, and the exhaustion of an enemy's will to fight. Pilots returning from these missions rarely spoke publicly. The secrecy was essential, but among themselves, in quiet hangars and briefing rooms, they shared the adrenaline, the near misses, the moments when enemy radar had almost locked on. Some carried photographs of their families in the cockpit, a reminder of why they risked everything. Others preferred to focus entirely on the mission, keeping emotions buried until after the wheels touched back down on Ukrainian soil. Every return flight was a silent victory of its own. Meanwhile, Ukrainian engineers worked in parallel, refining counter-drone systems to deal with Russia's swarms. Electronic warfare units jammed incoming Shaheds, anti-air guns peppered the skies, and small interceptor drones met attackers head-on. The layered defense reduced the percentage of drones reaching their targets, but never to zero. Each intercepted drone was a win, but each one that slipped through was a reminder that the fight was far from over. In the months following the Yelabuga strike, intelligence confirmed that Russian drone output had partially recovered, but not to pre-strike levels. The disruption had forced design changes and the use of less optimal parts. Some new Shaheds were reportedly less reliable, with higher crash rates before reaching targets. Ukrainian analysts saw this as proof that even temporary disruption of enemy production had battlefield value. The reduced reliability also undermined the psychological impact Russia sought with its drone campaigns. As fewer reached the heart of Ukrainian cities. By late summer, new plans were forming, combining deep strike missions with cyber operations aimed at crippling production software, a dual-layer attack that could simultaneously destroy physical infrastructure and corrupt digital systems controlling assembly lines. The concept was ambitious and risky, but if successful, could multiply the effect of each strike, making recovery slower and more costly. The Air Force began training for coordinated launch windows, where cyber teams would trigger digital intrusions moments before bombs hit, ensuring maximum chaos inside enemy facilities. Through all of this, the human cost remained high, not just for soldiers, but for civilians caught in the war's expanding reach. Displaced families rebuilt homes, only to be forced to flee again after new attacks. And yet, resilience remained the unspoken currency of the nation. Each successful strike, each intercepted drone, each rebuilt power line fed into a collective determination. The belief that survival was not enough. Victory, however distant, had to remain the goal. The night skies over Eastern Europe stayed restless. Every quiet evening felt like borrowed time. Both sides knew that another mission, another strike, could be hours away. But for the men and women behind the controls, in the war rooms, in the factories that replaced destruction with new tools of defense, the work continued without pause. Because in this war, momentum was measured not in miles gained, but in the capacity to keep hitting back, again and again, until the other side faltered.